Thank you to our partners for their support, without which this event would not be possible. Once again, a heartfelt thank you to all our corporate partners and convening sponsors.
Good morning, afternoon to all, depending on where you are in the world. That was pretty interesting to listen to the economic environment, and thank you to Bank of America for providing us with that insight. I find it very interesting to see that it is very, very important for all of us to see how the consumer is reacting. And we have a great panel today that will provide some of their insights into their own industries. I'm going to start introducing Adela Cepeda, first of all. Secondly, Fakiri Diaz Gala, and thirdly, Tony Ibarwen. All three of them have agreed to participate in our panel today. And we have a wide spectrum of representation here with different types of investments, different types of industries. So we're going to try to get quickly into some of those issues. And as you heard before, feel free to ask any questions you have, and we'll do our best to address them here within our panel. So I'm going to start simply by saying that we're very thankful for the LCDA by providing all of these wonderful opportunities for all of us, Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx, you name it. The fact of the matter is this organization has helped many of us to land on board seats. And based on what Roel mentioned earlier today, it's obvious that they're doing a fantastic job. So thank you, LCDA, Yester, and Roel for your leadership. Now let me get into some questions, and I'm going to start with Adela. Adela spends essentially all of her time in the funds world. She's broken the glass ceiling, so to speak, years ago. She's one of the few women in leadership positions in the investment world. And I'm going to ask you, Adela, to tell us what you're seeing. You already heard what BofA had to say about the economy. What are you seeing in your world of funds? What's your expectation in general of the economy and what you expect to happen in the fund world?
Thanks so much, Fernando. Great to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. Look, following up on that excellent overview of the markets are rising, and with it, funds and assets rise, and fees are based on the size of the funds. So it's a pretty strong economy right now for those in the investment community. So I see a continuation of that. I see a continuation of ETFs, which are the index funds. They've moderated somewhat because as markets have ups and downs, active investment management takes on some hold. And I see that people understand that sometimes it's important to have an active manager there. So I see a very good economy ahead in the fund world. And I'm hoping that there will also be increased opportunities for Latinos, because this is a world where we are not very well represented. And I'd like to make a difference in that. And I would hope that other fund directors will strive to include more Latinos on the fund board inclusion and oversight.
Are you seeing in the returns of the funds provide? Are you seeing what we're all seeing in the general world? The Dow Jones just broke a record, broke 36,000 points. The Nasdaq is breaking records. Are you seeing the same types of returns in the funds?
Sure, because many funds mimic the fund indexes, so they just go right along. Other funds, maybe that have emphasized technology, which is, a runaway success because every company's technology involving digital assets has accelerated. And that's why that sector of the economy is growing so disproportionately. So those funds that focus on that are having disproportionate and above market returns. So I'm seeing that. And, the success is worldwide. Even though emerging markets has ups and downs, in this economy where the whole world is recovering from COVID and it's coming back, most sectors are doing very well.
Good. Let me bring next our next panelist, Fakiri Diaz-Cala, who is in one of these new worlds that we're seeing, and the world of SPACs. Fakiri, good morning or afternoon, whatever you are. I think you're in Miami. But we were talking a little bit about your world of SPACs. You've been involved in several of them in the last few years. Tell us a little bit more about what that really is, and explain in a few words here to the audience. What is the difference between a SPAC and an IPO?
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you for a wonderful conference that's already starting. So SPAC is really a ready-made vehicle to be able to take a private company public in a much shorter period of time, let's say in about 90 days, than would take a traditional IPO. There are a number of Hispanic-owned companies, I think, that would benefit greatly from having conversations with SPACs and considering going public that way.
Good. And what you're seeing today, though, there's a tendency to get into SPACs more so than IPOs. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We have seen a record issuance of SPACs overall. There's about 450 out there looking for partner companies to go public. Year to date, there has been a significantly greater amount of SPAC deals. Just this morning, a great coffee company went public, $1.7 billion on a SPAC deal. So we're seeing quite a bit of those.
Good. We're going to come back to the issue of Hispanics and our involvement in that. But let me bring next Tony. Tony Ibarwen. He's got this terrific experience of being part of the Fed. He's been part of the Federal Reserve, and he's also been part of the private world. So he kind of has the view of both worlds, which is in my view very, very interesting. So based on your experiences in both the private and the Fed world, what do you think is going to happen with the Fed? And we just heard from B of A that they're expecting some sort of a move here in the next few quarters. And obviously, you can't share the confidentiality of it, but it's only like 300 of us, so we promise not to tell.
Thank you for that, Fernando. And I should open by saying these are my comments and my opinions. So I'm not, in this regard, a representative of the Fed. But Aditya gave a pretty good forecast there. But I think it's important for people to understand, and maybe many don't, that the Federal Reserve System is in place. It has a mandate to conduct the nation's monetary policy to promote both maximum employment and stable prices. And as Aditya mentioned, employment has improved dramatically, but labor participation rate is particularly low. So businesses like mine, mid-sized businesses, are having a really hard time finding workers to fill open positions, and we're having to increase wages to keep the teammates we have. On the inflation side, as he noted, it has spiked. Though I think, unlike Aditya, I'd say there's a reasonable case to be made that that's a function of the pandemic bounce back and related supply chain and labor shortages, and therefore not necessarily a longer term trend. So As he mentioned, the Fed is meeting today and is considering beginning to taper the support of the economy by reducing purchases of assets and over time increasing interest rates. So, what I think about it from a business perspective is we know that volatility is the enemy of long-term planning and investment. So the role of the Fed is, and the job that they're doing, which I think is a good job, is to help keep the economy relatively stable, which is really important to long-term economic prosperity.
Now, do you think the Fed decided not to raise the rates earlier because of the pandemic? In other words, how did the pandemic impact the Fed decisions?
Well, the Fed stepped in quite aggressively right off the bat, lowering interest rates and performing these asset purchases to support and stabilize the economy right at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout. And that is, in fact, one of its most important roles and part of the mandate. The question is, how do you stop that support? Or how do you begin to taper off of that? We're really looking for a longer term trend of some healthy inflation in the 2% or greater range over a longer period of time, and then getting to whatever maximum employment is, right? We were probably there pre-COVID at 3.5%. But the stingy labor participation rate that Aditya mentioned is going to be tricky. But we're going to get into the Latino discussion in a bit, but it is very important as we think about the future in terms of the participation, the relative age of our group across the board just tells you that we're going to be an even more important economic driver in the future of the United States.
Yeah, and let me transfer now to my next question, and it's going to be to you, Tony, since I have you here on the panel screen. Do you believe the pandemic has changed consumer behavior permanently? And if you do, why? Or if you don't, why not?
Well, both consumer and kind of business behavior, I think, has changed dramatically. Certainly this forum and the use of technology is now something we're much more familiar with. We probably have twice or three times as many people as we would have had if we were trying to meet together in San Francisco. And that's just something that we're all adapting to. On my core business of water, there's been an enormous interest and growth in clean drinking water. We think as a result of the pandemic in both Culligan and Quench, my water businesses, where people working from home realized that the water that they were used to getting in the office, which is typically filtered, wasn't as good at home. And so that's driven a big demand, and that's not going away. I think as people learn and adapt to these changes and opportunities, it will stick. And that's a big opportunity for us in businesses across the globe to be able to capitalize on the use of technology, the awareness that people have of some new opportunities as a result of the pandemic. And then there's going to be some downsides. Certainly leisure and hospitality travel has taken a hit. Maybe it will never come back quite the way it was before. But I think we're all very adaptable. And as I said earlier, it's really of any of us in business, really our opportunity is to take the stability of the future and maximize that by making smart investments.
Yeah, good. Let me now focus back to Adela and Adela. In your fund world. Let me ask you: Are you all very focused on ESG? ESG happens to be one of those themes that we all are starting to deal with more and more in the USA. Tell me about ESG in your funds, and which part of ESG is really the one more prevalent in the USA?
So that's an excellent question, because as you know, now the group of 20 is meeting overseas, especially on this topic of climate change. And so ESG, that stands for environmental, social, and governance issues, has become a central focus of fund management. And regulators have stepped in. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been very active on this front, saying, hold on, if you're going to call a fund ESG, explain how do you measure what you're calling green, what are the parameters, and they're also, the SEC is demanding of public companies more disclosure on their ESG effects so that there's more information. I think in the US, we have to come first to an understanding of how we're going to measure different things, particularly in the E side, the environmental side. The social side and the governance side are somewhat easier to measure in a sense. It's very easy to look at a board and decide if it's diverse or not, if it includes us or not. And I think what has happened as a result of ESG is that in the asset management world, as we're asking companies to take these measurements, we've looked around and, gee, are we measuring? And looking superficially, are we there? Is this an industry that is representing the United States in all its diversity? The answer, of course, is a resounding no. And now is the hard part. How do we fix this? How do we make change? How do we become a more inclusive industry? And we have to be ready as Latinos to engage in capital markets and in finance and be a part of this industry that offers so much opportunity. Ultimately, if we can get in.
That's terrific, because that allows me to transition now into the one subject that we and I believe the entire audience is eager to hear about, and that's the subject of how do we Latinos, Hispanics, how do we get ourselves more involved, and how do we get better prepared? So Fakiri, this is for you, since we're dealing with SPACs. What can Hispanics do to better prepare their work? To work with firms that are more dedicated to SPACs. What are your 2 or 3 suggestions for the audience to be ready to contribute and be elected, frankly, and be invited to participate in the SPAC?
So, Fernando, I think the first one is to really prepare and have a curriculum that allows you to be able to be a candidate that's ready to go. And that is either doing a program like the Latino Directors Program here, or doing one of the programs that the Financial Times offers, or that a number of universities have overall. But that's the first one, so that you have that seal of approval that says, hey, this person, because of their experience and their expertise, is board ready. That's the first one. Second one is network like crazy. And network like crazy makes a huge difference, but you need to have the first one ready in the first case, which is you need to have that pre-qualification. But that networking is as simple as being able to talk to other directors, have conversations. And the third part is you need to have 1 or 2 unique skill sets that you're bringing into the board, whether that's compensation, board governance, product knowledge, industry, but the have in any sector of a board that you're the right fit for, the more valuable it becomes. And then once you're in the board, we then need to have the discussion about being the lead independent director, or being a board chair, the audit committee chair, the compensation committee chair, the nomination chair, because those are also additional steps that you can have on the boards.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I what I see in and what I have seen in my world, mostly of consumer products, is that you have to be ready, but you also have to make sure you show your uniqueness. What can you contribute to it other than being Hispanic, other than being Latino? I more than once I've said no to recruiters who call in and say, "Well, you're Latino, and that's the main reason why we want you to talk to such and such a company." And I've said, "No, let's go through my experience. Let's go through what I can contribute, and then let's talk about that." And with obviously LCDA has done such a great job placing so many people now, but we're still so underrepresented. So now let me get to Tony. And since Tony, you've been in the consumer business and the Fed part of it, do you see any difference in Latinos participating more either in the Fed types of activities than in your private world, or what do you see in those two? Is there a difference?
Oh, I think the Fed understands clearly, and certainly during my tenure there, it's been a consistent topic of discussion to significantly improve inclusion and diversity across the bank structure. But I'm seeing it in private business as well, and it makes sense. There's a common sense element to this. As Roel Campos said earlier, we are a growing and very significant part of the population from a consumer standpoint, but also from a business formation standpoint and employment standpoint. So there is a very meaningful common sense element that says you want on a board or in an executive room a diversity of opinions and views. You benefit from understanding the variety of different types of consumers and business to business partners you have out there. And ultimately, I think it's clear that going forward, that means bringing into those boardrooms and those discussion places people from very different backgrounds. And so I'm very optimistic and super impressed with what LCDA has done in this regard, but I think we're just seeing the beginning of this trend.
Many years ago, someone told me that getting a little bit of experience in a not-for-profit board would be important, and I did a little bit of that early on in my career. Do you see, Tony? Do you see that helping any Latino to try to get into more board experience?
Yeah, I'd echo Fakiti's comments as well. You want to bring more to the table, and therefore any kind of experience as it relates to governance and how businesses operate at the highest levels is going to help your candidacy and make you more interesting and more attractive as a potential board member.
Yeah, Adela, we've heard you talk about the fact that we're so underrepresented, and you have one or two practices that you've shared with us before on what you do now to try to provide more opportunities for Latinos. Tell us a little bit about that. You've talked about how you offer now several candidates, not just one, but several candidates to your funds. Tell us a little bit about that, and what can the audience do to be in your list of those people that you can propose to different boards?
Thanks so much. Look, I think today the question is, what can you each individually do to make sure that we are better represented across the board? And that means that as a director, I have to ask more questions, right? I have to ask, are we being represented in the employee group? Are we hiring at the right levels? Are we retaining our employees? And we have to look at it by sector, by gender, and by ethnic group, all across. As a director, that is something that I should do. I shouldn't be shy about doing it. It's not self-interest to do it. It is good governance to do it. Because if I don't do it for my board and others there care about that, guess what? The investing public does, and we might not represent properly what we should be doing. So ask the questions. When there's an opening for a board, have a massive list. And all of us should be members of LCDA, and they are great at helping you find the right people. And I don't mean one person. It's a fact that if you bring one minority to the list of candidates, they will not be selected. You have to have a large number so that, the educate, okay, the next person, well, they're not C. Okay, the third person, okay, they're a C-suite or they have great education there. That's the one. Let's advance them. And let's look at the next one, because as the interview process moves along, you want to have fallback candidates that are inclusive. And so a lot of my agenda now is making sure that my boards add more diversity. Just me is not enough diversity. I want more women. I want more diverse people on the board. That's what I can do. If you're not on a board, be educated, be the best in your field. I think Fakiti talked about this. We need people that excel. When you excel and love what you're doing, it makes it easier to be selected for a position of board leadership. And absolutely, to the question of nonprofit boards, in addition to everything that was said about it, and Tony spoke very well on that, I would also say the network on nonprofit boards is excellent. I myself have benefited from those opportunities. So I would echo all of that. And again, be aggressive. It's our job. It's our responsibility to make sure that there is diversity across the field in our companies.
Those are all very good points. Let me come back to ESG. And you were talking about it, Adela, earlier. What I have seen in my experience is ESG. I've tried in my boards to make sure they're thinking of ESG as diversity and diversity of thought, as all of you have already talked about. I always talk to people about it's not about being Hispanic or Latino. It's about our experiences were different, our cultures are different, and the consumers in those cultures are different, and therefore we need to be thinking about that. ESG, I believe, is a very important vehicle for all of us to push the diversity through the ESG vehicle and make sure that our boards understand that. And speaking of that, we do have a question here from the audience. So I'm going to ask all three of you, and I'm sure you've seen this in your different experiences, but what are your thoughts about corporate activists on corporate boards that push to address ESG? Do you believe that activists are a good thing for boards? And to all, I'm posing that question to all three of you. Uh-oh.
Well, I'll jump in.
You either don't think activists are good, or you think they're terrific.
I'll jump in. I think there is an element of public company governance that benefits from being potentially shaken up in terms of strategy and direction and where they want to go. Having been in the private equity world as well, there's a lot of benefit to a longer term perspective of not being so focused on this quarter's numbers or this month's budget. In the couple of instances where I've had the opportunity to work with activists, it has been pleasant in that we have commonality of wanting to build the business for the future over a longer period of time than just this quarter. I think to the extent that there are activists that have a bit more of a short-term perspective and that are looking to make a quick buck, obviously that's disruptive and one could argue not particularly productive.
Yeah, Fakir, in your SPAC world, do you see activists? Are activists has involved in the SPACs or not yet?
No, for now we have the class action lawyers who are coming after us in the SPAC world. I imagine that activists will actually do come in. I would say that we have seen about 2 years of a lot of the SPAC mergers. I think we're going to see a number of companies that may have gone public via SPAC who may be left a little orphan once the SPAC sponsors move on. And I think that that's when we're going to see activists pouncing on those companies, which brings us back to those companies need to build very strong boards with a great diverse set of skills. Because if all of a sudden you're under an activist attack and you don't have a board that can set up an independent committee and truly evaluate what's going on, you're going to be in a far worse situation.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a room for a Latino activist to start shaking the trees in companies with a flag of, hey, what about diversity and what about diversity for Hispanics? There's a thought for you or for any of the audience out there who may be willing to take on that role. Are they like, what about the funds? What's your experience with activists?
Oh, a lot of experience with that, because in closed-end funds, there's an activist streak where there are investors that want to open the fund. These are very complex things requiring a lot of legal advice and strategy, and they are a very real part of the closed-end fund world. Despite all the regulations, it creates havoc. Let me just say, I used to be on a closed-end fund board. We had to convert it because it just didn't work with all the lawsuits that we were becoming subject to. So you have to be prepared for that. But I just want to say, I really admire and respect the activism of LCDA. We do not have a more active organization working on behalf of Latino professionals in the United States than LCDA. They are our activism. And I just want to commend Roel and the board team and Esther and her staff for what they do with facts, with numbers, to represent us in the corporate world. Thank you.
Good. So let me get another question from the audience here. What's your view on the impact of actively managing ESG factors within an organization, not only on the bottom line but also as a risk mitigation? So is ESG about risk as well, not just the bottom line? What's your view on that? Adela, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to go to you first.
Oh, yes, it is, of course. It's a risk if you're running a company and ignoring the Latino presence. I mean, that means your company doesn't have long-term viability, because our ethnic group as a group represents one of the fastest growing segments in the United States, and frankly, in the world when you consolidate it with the rest of Latin America. If we are not expert at the board and at the C-suite on this segment, we do not have long-term viability. So that's the G part of it. Just like if we're not understanding what's happening to the earth and the climate changes, then we don't have a long-term viability as a people. So yes, these are ways to understand very real risks and to try to fix things so that we can continue to be the prosperous economy that we have helped to build here in America.
Good. So we got about a minute left here. And so I'm going to ask all three of you to share with the audience your last messages. What's one thing you want the audience to remember? What do you think is what's your parting thoughts on to the audience? Ladies first. Adela, I'm going to start with you.
Education is everything. Be prepared for when the time comes to know how to lead.
Wonderful. Tony?
I would just express tremendous optimism for where we're headed. The trending is very much in the favor of the folks around this table, virtual table, and with the help of this organization, I think we're going to continue to make great strides in improving the economy and all the opportunities for us.
Terrific. Thank you. Fakiri?
So education and network.
Education.
Make sure that you use your network, be able to be present and be thought of.
Wonderful. So I'm going to leave you my parting thoughts are four, and I call it the up ladder of success. And it's show up, keep up, speak up, and get up. Because all of us get knocked down once in a while. We all have to get up. But we, in particular Latinos, we have to speak up more often and make sure that people are hearing of our contributions. Well, thank you all three. All three of you have been fantastic. This has been a great panel. Thank you very much for participating. I want to thank, obviously, the LCDA for organizing this. I think we have something like 300 plus registrations for the couple of days. So thank you, LCDA. Thank you to the Bank of America for sponsoring us. And obviously, thanks the audience for participating. A couple of good questions. And once again, my gratitude to all three of you for giving your time to all of us. Esther, thank you very much to you as well, and Roel.
We help build a better future when we harness the power to develop new ideas. The power to demonstrate what we're made of. To be the role model our community needs. To be recognized for who we are and what we do. The power to have the same opportunities as everyone else. To break ceilings, or to build bridges. To make things happen. To start something new. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué quieres lograr? What would you like the power to do?